Welcome to Still Plays a Galaxy of Heroes. This is a viable series video, and this series has always been the least defined, more of a catch-all, but I think I finally have a clear idea of what I want to do with it. So we'll probably be seeing a lot more videos like this. They also have the side benefit of being much easier and faster for me to make. The Talk series has always been about news and speculation, methods for in-depth looks, lowest viable teams about tackling events. New account is self-explanatory. Been on hiatus, but it will return at some point. Viable will be looking at various characters, squads or counters, what they can do, how to use them, and looking at those new Marquees or Omicrons, especially when they have a big or surprising impact, like the Traya Omicron video we did most recently in this series. And what we do here on Still Plays is we look at those new Marquees at 3 stars, Gear 11. And today we're going to be looking at those Tusken Marquees, do an overview of the squad that I'm using, any relevant Omicrons, which counters are viable, and then we'll wrap up at the end with the modding and the gearing. Skip around with the timestamps if you want to skip the preamble, and just get right into the footage. Here's a quick look at my Tusken faction, how they look. You can see that the majority are at Gear 11, except Aurora was recently brought up to Relic 4 for Jabba. The Tusken Raider has the Omicron. I put that one on right away. And the latest Marquees, Chieftain and Warrior, are both 3 stars and brought up to Gear 11 right away, have all their Zetas. No Omicron on Chieftain. The old school Tuskens, I'm going to throw in some of their old footage when they were all Gear 11 at the end of the video, because they are still a very good defensive squad if you don't have the Cairo resources to bring up Chieftain Warrior right away, or if you want to allocate your Kairos over towards Cal Kestis, or if you want to allocate your Cairo resources towards Cal Kestis. In terms of what I mean about those old Tuskens, here's a look of the SWGOH data on the meta defensive teams. The Tuskens, they're still on the first page down here in the 14% range. That places them above Finn and the Resistance Heroes, a Dash squad, some Grievous squads. Now, these you got to take with a little grain of salt, because like Jabba down here, Jabba is just because players are bringing up some very strong counters up against it, know how to handle it. That's not always going to be happening with different squads, which is why you see a few of these performing better than some objectively stronger characters. But the old school Tuskens are very usable at that Gear 11 threshold and are going to be able to mess up a number of squads. They were still getting me holds prior to the Tuskens being added. These are the Tusken squads I'd be considering right now. You have the old school Tuskens with Aurora, Raider, and Shaman. This is still an excellent defensive squad because it's still relatively uncommon, and that unfamiliarity is going to trip up a number of opponents. And these days, a lot of the best counters for it are being pulled towards other stronger teams, forcing players to use less ideal counters up against it. Raider is the only difficult character to gear out of those 3, and you do need the Omicron on Raider. Now, with the next 2 that use Chieftain and Warrior, Raider is going to be the best option. Shaman and Aurora do have enough synergy to work with Chieftain and Warrior, but what is critical about this Raider Omicron is it doesn't just bring in a summon, but it's the taunt. That forced taunt is going to keep Chieftain and Warrior alive. And because of that, I think it's vastly superior for these lower gear, lower star versions than the Chieftain Omicron with Sign of Jango, because that's an excellent squad at Relics. It's going to be very dangerous, but at low stars, Warrior especially is very vulnerable to being taken out early, and the Omicron is what is going to keep Chieftain and Warrior alive and be able to pull off the counters that I do in this video. All of this footage is from my Grand Arena, so this is KYBER2, and we are at 100% win rate with the squad. You can see this first one here is a double Ami Ackbar Leia. It does have SRP, who's not an ideal character for this faction, but he's still an annoying character to pair with the squad because he's going to revive every time he has a buff. But because the only AoE here is a very weak AoE from Scarif, they're not going to be much of a threat for taking out Chieftain and Warrior. And because of how Chieftain's unique or leadership function, I forget which of the 2, they're going to be pretty well controlled and under stun. So this is going to serve to be a hard counter, and a lot of squads that function similarly, that have a lot of the assists that are low AoEs, are going to be vulnerable, and that's why they're pretty clearly written as a trooper counter, but it's going to work against any similarly functioning squad. And you can see this last piece here, a little annoying as we try to time the removal of Scarif, but he goes down easy. Up next, we have Finn in the Resistance Heroes. Everyone's at Relic 5 with the Datacron. This was a much riskier battle. I wanted to throw this one earlier in this video because I wanted to showcase what this squad can do for anyone who doesn't stick around for some of the less questionable matches. So this one, there are more AoE abilities here, and this was from a more recent Grand Arena where I had pretty much figured out what I felt comfortable with this squad, and I wanted them to have more of a challenge and see if they could punch up. You can see I lost the summon, and I don't understand why he's not there. Maybe there's something in the kit that didn't function as intended, or I'm forgetting something in the kits for why he wouldn't be there, but I think he's supposed to be there. And it does make all of this a lot scarier. You can see the taunt is not as persistent, and it makes Warrior vulnerable to attacks, and I'm a little lucky that he doesn't get targeted. I think there was one scare that we have moved past. But otherwise, that was the scare. It's been a solid win. I would want to look more into the kits to understand why the summon is no longer around, or why Raider's no longer around. There might be something I'm forgetting. But they still perform very admirably here. With this battle, we're looking at a weaker Geos squad. There's no relics on Brood Alpha, but there are lower relics on Spy. I still wanted to showcase this one because of how common Geos are as a defensive team. Not as common as they used to be. I think a lot of players are understanding how vulnerable they are these days. But they're still common enough where you'll see them. They're a decent enough filler squad, I guess. You can check out one of my videos, a list video I did on the defensive squads you should not be using anymore. Geos are well represented on that list. But there is an AoE here to be concerned with from Brood Alpha, but Spy is going to be largely controlled by the Tuskens. So there's no major threat of Spy knocking anyone out. We just more have a scenario in which we're going to be slowed down by the health equalization, but the amount of stuns are going to prevent the Geos from having too much of an opportunity to recover. We just have to eliminate Brood Alpha before we can get a chance to take out Spy. Or we might actually get a chance. Yeah, we get a chance to take out Spy, so I take it. And with Warrior only doing attacks with the second special when I have the stacks for it. Here's the first footage up against a Mon Mothma squad. I did go up against a couple of them. This is just the more common version, and I think the more threatening and dangerous version that you can go up against. I do think I'm going to throw in some 5v5 footage up against Mon Mothma with Chieftain, but when we did 5v5, Warrior wasn't active, so you're not going to be able to see how Warrior looks on that squad, but I thought they were already very strong at that point with just Chieftain along with Shaman and Aurora. You can see here that it gets a little scary where Warrior was in threat, and maybe a Relic Cardoon makes enough of a difference where we lose Warrior, which is why I'm very careful with the AoEs when I try and handle this squad as a counter, especially up against these KYBER2 opponents. But I still felt like this was worth trying because of the success I had in the 5v5 scenarios with it, and because of the amount of recovery here. And my Chieftains pretty decently modded, not great, he could be much better, but he's still a gear 11 character, so there's a cap on how fast you can really get him. But as one of the fastest characters in game who's not a GL, or I think is the fastest character in game who's not a GL, getting him to start before Mon Mothma and Katarn, even with how Katarn's unique functions, wasn't too much of a problem. You can see we're just really being pulled in by Cara Dune, but they're largely being controlled by the stun mechanics. And now that we were able to eliminate Cara Dune a couple times, able to get through it. I just played my Grand Arena and finally got some Iden footage to go with the Tuskens. It's something I wanted to add to the video, so this is going to conflict a little bit with statements made earlier in the video where I think I referred to saying that I was undefeated with the squad. That is no longer the case. So take a look at this to get an idea of this is probably above their ceiling, these higher relic Iden squads, although I think it would have still been winnable had it not been fully relic or just a different combination of characters. And really what happens is we lose warrior in the initial volley. I consider quitting, but then I decided I wanted to just see what happens, play it out, see if maybe we could take out Dark Trooper. But we're not going to play this whole match because what you've seen here is what you're going to get. It's just, there's no risk of losing. This is a timeout. We're able to just keep healing, affect the cooldowns, try and attack when we can, but we're not doing any damage to Shore Trooper, and any damage that we do to Dark Trooper, he recovers from before we can do any more. It's with a different variety of Iden squads without relics that I do think the Tuskens would be viable, or if there were more stars on warrior so that she wouldn't be taken out in the opening like she was. Because once it gets going, I think it's fairly safe. Here's some older footage from the OG Tuskens. I'm choosing this battle because of the footage that I have, this was the strongest team that I faced. Embo lead, everyone's at relics. But this is a squad with minimal AoEs, and as long as that's the rule that you're following, you're going to find that Tuskens in general are going to perform very well, even at that Gear 11 staging ground threshold that I emphasize on this channel quite frequently. It's a very effective way at building out your roster quickly and being able to utilize new characters, new kits, new Omicrons in a way that's faster than a lot of your opponents. A lot of people think it's relics or nothing, and that just slows down the rate at which you can take advantage of new characters, take advantage of these new kits, and make a difference. And that's one of the big things that we do here, and that's what you're seeing with this video is me just not being afraid to utilize warrior and chieftain at these low star levels and being able to counter some fairly effective teams. Now you can see these OG Tuskens, it's a little riskier. We do lose some characters, but we're not at any risk for losing. It's just a little bit lower banner. I want to show some 5v5 footage of what Warrior really contributes and brings to this squad. We're going to go up against a Mon Mothma squad. Warrior wasn't in the game yet, so we threw in Sign of Django as a fifth. But what you're going to see here is what this squad is missing. And we're not going to show the whole thing because this is going to result in a timeout. So there's a couple AoEs here. Cara is a little annoying, and there's a couple scare points, but what you're going to ultimately see is what we are lacking, and that is the taunt that we had in 3v3 from Tusken Raiders Omicron that was pulling in all those attacks away from Warrior and Chieftain, and what we're really missing here is damage. And I think there might be a dispel that Warrior had that helped made getting around the Cara Dune synergy in that 3v3 a little bit more simple. But you can see we got a little close to losing Chieftain, but after that initial portion, we're not going to really be in a scenario when we're risking losing anybody. everyone's going to be more or less well controlled. The problem that we're going to have is the Baze Chirrut synergy is going to become very annoying, and the problem that ultimately ends in the timeout, which is why I'm looking forward to being able to test what warrior is going to contribute to this squad. Because you can see him trying to take out Chirrut, because I know he's going to become a problem. But Baze taunts, we don't have a way to deal with that taunt without warrior on the squad. And he's just going to keep getting that stacked healing over times, which is going to prevent us from taking anyone out. Now, I probably could have gone and should have gone after Kyle Katarn, but I knew what was going to stop me from winning this match was going to be Baze and Chirrut. And even if I took out Katarn, there's a chance that they would be revived by Mon Mothma. But we're going to stop this here because this just results in a timeout and Cara Dune's going to come back. Now, I wanted to do a modding overview, and this is not how you should be modding these characters. This is not the best way to do it. But it's a good example that you don't need to have excellent modding to get good utility out of these characters. I just used the mods that I had on hand. You can see nothing is above plus 15. I do have all my mods are above plus 10 on Chieftain. But overall, at 276 speed, he could be and should be far faster. But even at this level, they're going to be effective. You can see similar things going on with Tusken Warrior. Crit damage, crit chance sets, and I have all my mods above plus 10 speed, or nearly all of them. The cross is at plus 8 speed. So it's just the fastest mods that I had on hand. Not amazing, solid enough. This speed here is at 242, and that's not great either, but it's still enough to counter all of those squads that we showed in this video, and the better that you mod them, the better results you're going to get. See, Raider has the worst mods of all. He's got several mods that are below 10 speed. I actually want to go back in and remod him, but I haven't touched his mods in a year. But it's just to show that you don't have to have the best mods on these characters, and they're still going to do very well. A lot because of Chieftain's mechanics and how they're going to control the field and how momentum is going to speed them up regardless. The speed here on Raider is only 200 speed, and the mods here is just partly because this is one of my weaker mod sets, and this is a lower priority faction for me. We're going to do a cursory look at the gear here. I've done a little bit more in-depth in other videos, in the talk videos with the kit reveals. I just wanted to emphasize here that they're not a huge investment, and you can get these characters to gear 11 fairly easy these days, especially after all the gear changes. We're really going to emphasize the Kairos here. So Chieftain, at gear 8, you got 2 stun guns. Gear 9, another stun gun and a Kairos set. Gear 10, 1 additional Kairos set and some eyeballs. So 3 stun guns, 2 eyeballs, 2 Kairos. That's not terrible. There are far harder to gear characters, and the 2 sets of Kairos, that's a little bit below average. Most new Marquees usually have 3 sets of Kairos. Tusken Warrior, same deal. At Gear 8, 1 stun gun, 2 stun cuffs. Gear 9, 1 set of Kairos. And Gear 10, you have 2 sets of Kairos. So with Warrior, you have a 3 Kairos set character, but that's really the biggest pain point. There's an eyeball, there's a there's a single stun gun. So it's really just the Kyber attacks on Warrior that are going to slow you down. And if you're able to focus on those, farm those up, use currency to get them, you can get this faction usable fairly quickly and take advantage of what this can contribute to your squads. And we're going to wrap up here with Tusken Raider, because Aurora and Shaman are easy to gear characters and not worth diving deeper into, but Tusken Raider is actually much better than I remember him being. He's more Carbanti heavy than he is stun gun heavy, and he has no Kyrotex, obviously being an older character. But here's a look at a couple of the levels. 7 has no hollow lenses. There is a stun gun at 8. There's an additional stun gun at 9 with another 2 Carbantes, one with a Mark V thermal, and at gear 10 he has another Mark V thermal that has a Carbante, but also an eyeball. So really not terrible, definitely on the easier end, but relatively speaking to Aurora and Shaman, harder to gear. So if you have the resources, these new Marquee Tuskens are absolutely worth the resources. And if you're watching this prior to the lock-in for this final week of 3v3 Grand Arena, they're really going to open up in your offensive strategies and give you a lot of flexibility in how you approach some of these common defensive teams. And if not, you're going to need them fairly soon anyway for the Crate Dragon raid. So starting to give them some attention and work towards that goal is going to be worth it. But thank you for watching. Be safe out there, everyone, and be excellent to each other. This is still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.